Imagine that your entire life, everything you believed in, is built on a foundation that hides an icy truth. The truth that behind the ideals of the party, behind the slogans of universal public good, a completely different life was boiling. A life full of hidden riches you never even suspected. What if I told you that while you were standing in lines for simple groceries, billions of dollars were being redistributed behind the walls of Kremlin offices? Billions that did not belong to the state, but were collected from your taxes, your contributions, your hopes. We will tell you about the black cash of the Communist Party, about its secret economy, which existed parallel to the official one. This is not just money. It's a network of banks in Europe, accounts in Switzerland, registered in the names of people you would never meet, people who didn't even know they had become owners of millions. But the most terrifying part begins when the familiar world collapses. You will learn how these countless treasures accumulated over years suddenly dissolved. Where did those billions end up? How did ordinary drivers and librarians become owners of fortunes they only dreamed of? We will uncover the secrets of intricate schemes behind which stood not politicians, but those who managed finances from the shadows. And you will understand why some of these key figures suddenly and inexplicably disappeared, or their fate was cut short under the strangest circumstances. In the Soviet Union, at every meeting, every party gathering, we were told about modesty, about how all work was aimed at the good of the people. The party, we were assured, lived within its means in simplicity, dedicating itself to serving society. But behind the facade of this ideal picture, in the backstage spheres, there existed a completely different reality, a hidden but powerful economy, having nothing to do with the official state budget, taxes, or industrial revenues. These were billions of unofficial, black party money, nowhere officially accounted for. Their sources were diverse: currency from the sale of Soviet weapons abroad, revenues from intricate foreign economic operations carried out through specially created firms, as well as membership fees that millions of party members annually transferred to the party treasury. Intermediary structures working with the West also played a significant role. All these funds flowed into something resembling a party fund. But this was more of a figurative name, because in reality it implied an entire network of accounts, assets, and property, registered in the names of straw persons and organizations, carefully hidden from prying eyes. According to analysts, by the end of the 1980s, the party had up to $15 billion at its disposal. And these were not just paper money, but assets stored in foreign currency and securities placed outside the Soviet Union. These impressive sums were controlled by a narrow circle of trusted individuals in the Central Committee of the CPSU, and most citizens were unaware of their existence. Of particular interest is the fact that the Communist Party had its own banks abroad. One of them, for example, Bank, was located in Vienna, and in addition to it, there were accounts in banks in Switzerland and Germany. Through these financial institutions, the party could legalize millions of dollars, conduct operations that were not officially reflected in the USSR's accounting, operating in complete circumvention of the Ministry of Finance and Gosplan. It is surprising that this entire complex system was created and maintained for decades, carefully guarded. Even among high-ranking officials, only a few knew of its existence. And when the Soviet Union began to disintegrate, these hidden assets were among the first to disappear into the shadows. When the word dacha was mentioned in the USSR, ordinary people imagined a modest wooden house where they diligently cultivated vegetable beds, drawing water from a well. But for party leaders, the word dacha meant something entirely different. These were huge plots of land with luxurious mansions, private hunting grounds, private lakes, helicopter pads, and personal security. These residences were located in the most picturesque places, on the shores of the Black Sea, in the Moscow region, in the Caucasus, and in the Baltic states. Access to them was exclusively for the chosen few, members of the Central Committee, the Politburo, and the highest leadership of the special services. These dachas served not just as places of recreation, they were true symbols of power and status. Personal chefs, medical staff, baths, saunas, and even private cinemas operated there. All this was provided at the expense of the state, or rather at the expense of those very funds that bypassed ordinary citizens. According to official data, there were more than 500 such dachas in the USSR, and almost all of them were registered not to specific individuals, but to fictitious state structures. Formally, they were listed as recreation centers for officials or creative retreats for writers. In reality, they were closed territories where entry for ordinary people was strictly forbidden. The most striking thing began after the collapse of the USSR. Many of these objects unexpectedly ended up in private hands. A significant part of the former party dachas was quickly re-registered to relatives or individuals close to officials. And all this happened literally for pennies. To this day, no full investigation has been conducted into who became the owner of this expensive real estate and how. Many of these properties are still owned by shadow owners and are used as elite villas, sanatoriums, and private residences. But if party dachas were only the visible part of the privileges, the true treasures were kept in a completely different place, far beyond the borders of the USSR. While the country stood in lines for groceries, the party elite methodically transferred huge sums abroad. Everything happened quietly, without much publicity. The money that had been accumulating for decades in the black cash of the CPSU began to be actively withdrawn to Europe and the USA even before the official collapse of the Union. This was carried out through complex schemes, using shell companies, fake contracts, bank transfers to accounts registered in the names of unsuspecting technical persons. In 1990, when the situation in the country became very unstable, the disappearance of about $4 billion from accounts controlled by party structures was recorded. This money literally vanished. Formally, it was listed in Soviet foreign economic organizations, but in fact, it ended up in foreign accounts, often in Swiss, Austrian, and German banks. It is particularly surprising that some accounts were registered to people who could not be found at all later. These were so-called technical persons: drivers, security guards, librarians. They didn't even realize that they had become the formal owners of millions. The banks that accepted these funds didn't ask too many questions. The main thing was the capital itself. Accounts were opened under the guise of trading or consulting companies, and the incoming money was declared as payment for services or for Soviet intellectual property. To date, the traces of most of these funds have been lost. Some of them were invested in elite real estate, others in private investment funds. No one has ever conducted a full investigation into where exactly these billions went. But transfers of such a scale do not happen by themselves. Behind every account, every financial scheme, and every dollar stood specific people. They knew exactly where the money was going, in whose name the accounts were registered, and what to do if everything suddenly started to collapse. These were not politicians, not the top party officials, but those who were in the shadows: accountants, financiers, experienced economic managers. There were few of them, but it was they who held the keys to the black cash of the CPSU. Several officials involved in party finances were later found with fatal consequences. Officially, this was attributed to death, careless situations, or sudden cardiac arrest. Others simply disappeared without a trace. All of them were connected with the financial structures of the CPSU, maintained documentation, participated in money transfers, knew the scheme for withdrawing money, and for some reason either disappeared or did not live to see serious investigations. When the USSR collapsed, it might have seemed that everything was starting with a clean slate. But in reality, everyone's starting positions were completely different. Some lost their jobs, others, an entire country, and a third group gained access to billions left from the CPSU. This money, about which no one spoke aloud, suddenly became the basis of new wealth. Thus, the class of future oligarchs emerged. Part of the party's funds did not just disappear, but was smoothly transferred into private hands. The money was not kept in one place. There were party warehouses, foreign currency accounts, valuable property, real estate, brand stores, buildings, dachas, recreation centers. All these assets were gradually registered to newly created private companies. The owners became former party functionaries or their close entourage. The strangest thing is that the documents that could confirm this transfer were either destroyed or classified. Many former party figures rapidly retrained as businessmen. They created banks, trading houses, investment funds. They had established connections, access to resources, and most importantly, management experience. They perfectly knew how the system worked and simply seized the moment. Instead of strict gray suits, expensive coats, and mink coats appeared. Instead of speeches about equality, personal drivers, elite restaurants, and well-thought-out business plans. The money that used to serve party needs quickly turned into private capital. But to spend it openly, the main thing had to be done: legalized. Simply put, everything that once belonged to the party became the property of the new masters of life. Dashas were re-registered to relatives, buildings, and factories, to newly created private firms. Financial flows were structured as investments, and connections in ministries helped to legalize all of this. Party leaders and high-ranking officials became owners of banks, trading houses, hotels, and even oil companies. According to official data by 1993, about 40% of the country's largest enterprises were under the control of former CPSU members. These were the same people who had recently given speeches about socialism and now discussed profits, shares, and business. They did not participate in privatization on equal terms with ordinary citizens. They already had money, connections, and competent lawyers. Most importantly, no one was held accountable. These people quickly integrated into the new system. The billions of dollars that had accumulated in the party's black cash for decades did not simply vanish into thin air. Part of them was channeled into business, another part settled in personal palaces, but a significant portion is still hidden in offshore accounts and private funds abroad. This money is not held in open accounts. It is registered to trusts, shell companies, and charitable organizations, through which assets can be controlled while remaining an anonymous owner. So, let's continue to uncover the darkest secrets and little-known pages of that era, when untold riches and sophisticated schemes were hidden behind the facade of a national party. Party assets collected over decades did not simply dissolve into thin air after the collapse of the USSR. On the contrary, many of them were transferred to so-called dormant structures. These were companies, funds, trusts, registered to straw persons, or even fictitious founders whose activities were officially frozen or minimized. Imagine an entire arsenal of assets: real estate, accounts, securities, even shares in future enterprises that were in reserve, awaiting their hour. As if someone was preparing in advance for a new economic order, laying the foundation for their future prosperity. These dormant structures were a kind of reservoirs where funds were siphoned off, funds that were not supposed to fall into the sight of law enforcement agencies or new governments. Sometimes such structures were created under the guise of charitable organizations or research institutes. Formally, they were engaged in studying the history of the CPSU or supporting party veterans. But in reality, they served as a reliable shield for protecting and multiplying party capital. Entire clans of former party functionaries, often linked by blood or many years of joint work, acted as a single organism. They synchronously unfroze these dormant assets, re-registering them to themselves or their relatives when the situation became more stable. Using their connections, experience, and of course financial resources, they quickly integrated into the new economy, becoming founders of banks, trading houses, and industrial enterprises. These assets, like invisible threads, finance political and economic projects aimed at strengthening the positions of the former party elite in the new Russia. They became the type of capital that allowed them not to participate in the redistribution of property on general terms, but to manage it from the shadows, gaining undeniable advantages. In addition to all this, there were other less obvious aspects of party wealth rooted in the Cold War era. When we speak of secret facilities, we are not just referring to elite dashas, but to an entire network of premises and structures built with party money, but not for comfortable recreation, but rather for a strategic reserve. These could have been specially equipped bunkers, warehouses with valuables, or even places for conducting particularly confidential operations. One cannot exclude the fact that a significant part of party finances could have been obtained through channels related to intelligence operations, the sale of secret information, or smuggling. It is quite probable that some of the money directed to developing international solidarity actually ended up in party accounts. The spy habits of the highest party leadership were not limited to political maneuvering. They also permeated the sphere of financial management. The use of encrypted codes, clandestine meetings in neutral countries, the transfer of information through trusted persons, all of this was an integral part of the mechanism for preserving and multiplying party capital. There are stories that, although not 100% confirmed, paint a picture of attempts to take abroad not only cash, but also valuable documents containing information about financial schemes or even technologies related to party assets. This could have been an attempt to maintain control over something more fundamental than just financial flows. In this story, there are also entirely unconfirmed but intriguing hypotheses. For example, the so-called ICE accounts, accounts that, proviso, according to rumors, were specially created as frozen debts or illiquid investments. They serve to avoid unnecessary questions from international financial regulators. These dormant accounts could be activated by special signals or codes known only to a narrow circle of initiates. There is also a hypothesis about key figures having double or even triple passports. This allowed them to conduct the most delicate financial operations, creating several official biographies and sets of documents for themselves, which made them virtually elusive. There are also more sophisticated methods of legalization, cultural legalization. According to one hypothesis, part of the party funds was converted into works of art, antiques, or rare books. These items were then sold abroad under the noble guise of preserving cultural heritage. This method allowed for easy transportation and sale of valuables without attracting undue attention to the origin of the money. In addition to everything, along with financial reports, there probably also existed encrypted journals or diaries where key transactions, names, and operation details were recorded. The discovery of such documents could shed light on many secrets, but most likely they were destroyed or hidden along with other compromising materials. And of course, one cannot forget about party trust funds for children and grandchildren. It is possible that some of the funds were transferred to long-term trust funds intended to ensure the well-being of future generations of the former party elite. These funds operated under the guise of charity or investment projects, ensuring the continuity of power and wealth.